You ready?
Yeah.
You ready? All right, hold on. Here we go.
From the newsroom of the Bryan College Station Eagle, this is the My Aggie Nation podcast. I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle over there, Alex Miller, also of the Eagle, as usual. We're here on a very ridiculous, very crazy day in College Station. I get a phone call from young Alex Miller over here at 9:23 or something like that this morning. I was out covering golf all day yesterday. The Aggie golf team had to check pages last night, which is a well into the early hours of the morning job here at the Eagle. So I was getting my beauty rest at that time, and quickly had to throw on a shirt, wash my hair, get to Kyle Field because Jimbo Fisher was having an impromptu press conference to detail and break down and talked about a little bit of what Nick Saban had to say last night at a charity event in Birmingham, where he said that A&M, quote, bought their entire roster, end quote. So let's hear a little bit about what Jimbo Fisher had to say about that in his introductory statement of that press conference in Kyle Field today.
Yes, I would. First of all, I'll say it's a shame that we have to do this. It's really despicable. It's despicable that somebody can say things about somebody and an organization. More importantly, 17-year-old kids. You're taking shots at 17-year-old kids and their families. And they broke state laws. They're all money. We bought every player on this group. We never bought anybody. No rules were broken. Nothing was done wrong. It was all in the way we do things, the ethics in which we do things. And these families, it's despicable that a reputable head coach could come out and say this when he doesn't get his way or things don't go his way. The narcissist in him doesn't allow those things to happen, and it's ridiculous. But when he's not on top, and the parity in college football he's been talking about, go talk to coaches who coach for him. You'll find out all the parity. Go dig into wherever he's been. You can find out anything. And it's a shame that you got to sit here and defend 17-year-old kids and families and Texas A&M because we do things right. We're always going to do things right. But we're always going to be here. We're doing a heck of a job. These coaches have done a great job. Our players have done a great job. The whole organization of recruiting people. It's despicable that we got to sit here at this level of ball and say these things to defend the people of this organization, the kids, 17-year-old kids, and their families. It's amazing. Some people think they're God. Go dig into how God did his deal. You may find out about a guy that a lot of things you don't want to know. We built him up to be the czar of football. Go dig into his past or anybody that's ever coached with him. You can find out anything you want to find out, what he does and how he does it. And it's despicable. It really is. And it's a shame we have to sit up here and have this conversation about things we do. And it's personal to us? Yes, it is. It's personal to A&M. It's personal to our players. It's personal to our coaches and everybody involved. And I know the guy. Know him really well. It's amazing that we're allowed to do those things. It's really despicable. And I hate it. For our players who are coming here, who did things the right way, have done things the right way, and will continue to do things the right way, I apologize to you that people insult you publicly the way they're doing it. And our fans, I apologize to you guys for people saying those things about Texas A&M. I promise you this, there are no violations. There are nothing wrong. It's the second time we've had to do this with grown men who don't get their way and want to pout, throw a fit, and act up. Just go ask all the people who work for him. You'll know exactly what he's about. I always said this. My dad always told me this. When people show you who they are, believe them. He's showing you who he is.
Well, Travis, certainly a strong accusation from Nick Saban last night, but even maybe a stronger rebuttal from Jimbo Fisher this morning. What'd you make of all of the comments that Jimbo said? Because he did not hold back.
He really didn't. And we were talking about this a little bit before we all got started here, and you kind of said Jimbo's had some fiery rebuttals in his time so far at A&M when it was talking about maybe taking the LSU job, or the first time he defended this 2022 signing class. And it was emotional, but it wasn't as almost at the point of breakdown as it was. I mean, you could feel that he kind of felt this in his soul. It's interesting. I guess the most interesting part necessarily isn't barking back at Nick Saban because coaches have little tiffs here or there, but this is a guy in Jimbo Fisher who coached under Nick Saban for several years, has said they have a friendship, has always praised what he's been able to do at Alabama and called him one of the best out there. And he completely, and his quote was, "We're done." When asked, did you talk to Nick after he said that last night? He said, "Nick's tried to reach out. I'm not talking to him. We're done." And so for a coach to kind of say that with how tight-knit a lot of times the coaching community, that's kind of what stood out. And then plus you have all of the very pointed comments about calling Nick Saban, God, and saying he walked on water, calling him a narcissist, saying if you lie or cheat when he grew up, his old man would slap him upside the head, and maybe someone should do that to him. Talking about Nick Saban, so yeah, there was the plethora of one-liners, but I think the interesting part, actually, to me, was the fact that it does seem like there's an actual rift here, and that whatever relationship, friendship they might have had is in essence over.
Yeah, my whole thing was, like you said, it was one thing when there was kind of this anonymous post by Sliced Bread on Bro Bible, and then when Lane Kiffin made his comments. This is just next level, though, when it's Nick Saban. I mean, he is the greatest coach of all time in college football, arguably.
Yeah.
And that just seemed to hit home to Jimbo even further than, whether it was Kiffin or somebody anonymously. But yeah, I mean, well,
real quick, let's kind of break down how we got here,
right?
For those who have not followed this soap opera from day one. Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher signs, according to 247 Sports, the greatest recruiting class in 247 Sports history. They have 247 Sports history. They have 8 5-stars, 14 4-stars. It's the highest rated class. It's something A&M hasn't achieved, and Alabama, though, has been doing. I think they surpassed the 2017 Alabama class, if I'm not mistaken, for that designation on the 247 Sports board. So everyone says it's one of the greatest classes of all time. Well, it's also the first year that NIL is really in play in the recruiting process. And when I say in play in the recruiting process, that's generalizing what NIL actually means. Of course, NIL is players getting compensation for name, image, and likeness, their name, image, and likeness, and that the Texas state legislature opened that up to any college athlete, and those rules are governed by SB 1328, I think, the Senate bill that made NIL legal. Now, as a part of that Senate bill, it said that universities can't entice players to come to their programs by the promise of NIL deals. That is illegal according to state law. Why Jimbo Fisher in some of those responses was saying that Nick Saban was accusing them of being criminal in essence because they were violating a Texas state law. Nick Saban, of course, last night talking to a bunch of donors, he says, and his quote was, "I know the consequence is going to be difficult for people who are spending tons of money to get players," he said. "You read about it, you know who they are. We were second in recruiting last year. A&M was first. A&M bought every player on their team, made a deal for name, image, and likeness." And then Saban went on to say that they have not bought any players on their roster. So Jimbo then calls this impromptu press conference to again address what's going on there. So Alex, I know you asked me and you kind of talked about it. What stood out to you too?
I'm just curious what this will incur going forward. Okay, because I read in a column on Sports Illustrated how there's been kind of like a gentleman's agreement. Coaches will talk off the record of accusations of what teams do and schools do. They beat around the bush on the record. Jimbo's kind of done that at times, but he didn't make any pointed saying that Alabama did anything wrong. But I mean, this was about as candid on the record as you see from a coach. I'm just curious what exactly is going to come from this, because kind of like in John Wick 2, when John Wick goes up to Santino in the Continental Hotel, and there's the truce, you can't kill anyone on Continental grounds, and he just square kills him in the bar, and then all hell breaks loose in the third movie. I'm not saying that's exactly what's going to happen, but it kind of feels like it.
Yeah. Let me clarify a few things here. With Senate Bill 1385, the exact verbiage in that as far as trying to bring in recruits with NIL is the quote, the programs cannot provide or solicit a prospective student athlete of an intercollegiate athletic program at the institution with compensation in relation to the prospect student's name, image, and likeness. Of course, too, and this isn't the case. We have to say that since this is a state legislative type situation, each state a lot of times has their own laws on the book, so it's not necessarily uniform on how name, image, and likeness works in Texas as opposed to Alabama. In fact, I think Alabama is in the process or just passed a law that enables students to be able to work with the university on some of these, and maybe the university can help them get some of these deals. And in some places, even high school students can get compensation for their name, image, and likeness. It's something that can't happen in Texas yet as well. So that's a few little clarifications on that. Also, according to The Athletic, who did a story on The Fund, which is a Texas A&M's collective or a group of donors that kind of started a business to help manage the rights and get NIL deals for some of these students, that according to some of the unnamed sources of that report, they secured deals with several members of that 2022 recruiting class to a figure that was in the low single-digit millions. But they said they did it legally, which means they would have had to have done it after they signed with A&M.
Right. And, what I found was interesting, Stuart Mandel of The Athletic, if I can pull it up, he talked with an NIL attorney, the guy who represented the quarterbacks committed to Tennessee, who's allegedly got this $8 million NIL deal. And, he said in the quote, "Having worked with A&M's collective, everything Jimbo Fisher said is 100% correct and true. He didn't violate any bylaws if you keep the collective separate from the school. A&M and the collective are just very good at what they do." Has A&M made deals? Probably. I mean, clearly they have. They've got this collective together that works in the shadows and is making stuff happen. A&M is one of the richest athletic departments in the country. Are there ways to work around it? Probably. And, A&M might just be at the forefront of this. We don't know the specifics. Did they go into anything wrong? Maybe, maybe not. But it's just very interesting how pointed some of these things are, and, just kind of the inner workings being so kind of mystique and kind of novel right now.
It's interesting, too, because the point that Nick Saban was actually trying to make in his full quote when he was really talking about NIL and just happened to have this aside about A&M was the fact that there needs to be uniformity. There needs to be some kind of federal law passed, or the NCAA needs to come through with full regulations that says you can't induce players to come. You can't, so that some schools can help their athletes provide NIL deals. Some can't. There just needs to be uniformity overall. And it's the same concept that Jimbo Fisher has said.
Right.
It's just that Nick Saban put that into place. And so I do think that they have a point there. They do need to have some kind of federal legislation. And according to multiple reports, Greg Sankey and several other, Mark Emmert from the NCAA has gone to Washington to try to lobby Congress into getting into this realm. And not to get too political on the My Aggie Nation podcast, but when they started looking at some of these NIL deals, it was one of the few bipartisan issues that was happening in Washington at the time. Now, the details of how to do that had some partisan aspects to it, but you would think that this would be a pretty bipartisan slam dunk moving forward. It's just going to be interesting to see if the federal government is going to allow the NCAA to have some of these antitrust appeasements and some antitrust leeway that, like, for instance, the NFL and some of the pro sports teams do, or if you're going to move in a sense towards what Nick Saban was saying, and you have to pay players. They're going to be employees of the university, and it is going to be a pay-for-play situation, and or will you let the players unionize and let them collectively bargain for what their compensation is going to be? Because that's the difference between the NFL and the NCAA, what's going on there is because the NFL is able to collectively bargain with the NFL and present a working negotiation, whereas NCAA athletes, they can't collectively bargain, they can't work this out, so it's the Wild West. You can't have something like a salary cap in the NCAA, and something that Jimbo Fisher brought up at the Houston Touchdown Club.
Right, yeah. Jimbo's been all for the regular. He said that this morning, that he's all for uniformity and trying to solve this out. He doesn't know exactly what the solution is, he says, but he says he's for it. And what's interesting too is Saban's talking at this charity event, right? Mm-hmm. Last night. Probably with some big wig Alabama donors, right? And so he's making the point that A&M's working in this different stratosphere that Alabama currently is not. Saban has been one of the most cutting-edge coaches in the country for years now. That's why Alabama's been able to maintain their dominance for so long. You think about the way that he was able to build the program, and then the way it was innovated when he really went to the spread offense. I mean, Saban's old school, but he can learn new tricks pretty fast, and he's recognized that he's not top dog right now in some of these areas, and he's trying to figure out how he can, it seems.
Yeah, there's coaches. I mean, if you look at the college basketball realms, look at the Mike Krzyzewskis and some of these coaches that retired, and some of them, maybe not saying directly, but they just don't want to deal with this. And it kind of seems like, and Jimbo, to some extent, I think he understands how much and how important this is. And A&M was very on the front lines of getting some of this NIL, some of this collective stuff up and rolling. But you kind of get that feeling from some of these coaches that it's just not something that they want to deal with.
Sure. And, Jimbo might be one of them that doesn't want to deal with it hands-on. And fortunately for him, in the law, he can't be. So A&M's got their ducks in a row in some regards, and it's a system to where, Jimbo doesn't have to necessarily deal with that because A&M's got all these other people who can and stay within what is regulated and what is law right now.
Yeah, here's one other issue, though, I do want to raise, and the fact that when you look back at that Athletic article that talked about the fund, Texas A&M's collective, who, by what Stuart Mandel talked about with that attorney he talked with, and with a lot of stories out there that say that they're on the cutting edge. They are a program that is doing this well and doing it right. They mentioned to Andy Staples in that article that they don't see the need to necessarily broadcast and advertise what they're doing. They're doing this in the shadows. I mean, technically, in the story, the fund was in quotes. It's not maybe what the name of the actual registered LLC is for that collective. They want to just do word of mouth deals and talk with the athletes directly and not advertise. And part of me goes, I mean, I get that. I mean, you talk to several people who are in the NIL space, and I actually asked the question of them, okay, talking a little bit more about the contracts. So anytime a student athlete does an NIL deal, they have to do a contract with that, and that contract has to be turned over to the university per Texas state law for the university to make sure that it follows all of the state laws and it's in compliance with everything. So they have those on record. My argument is those contracts need to be open record for journalists like you and me or anyone else to be able to see and be able to tabulate how many and how much these deals are doing and how much money these players are getting. So when a coach does come out and say, our entire offensive line is getting $4 billion, we can verify that. And so I went up to some of these people and asked them, so tell me the opposite side of this, because in my realm, in my world of scope, this seems like a no-brainer that you would want to do this, but why would the athletes, why would you as an NIL professional not like them? They say, well, why would they have to disclose? Pro football players don't have to disclose what their deals are and share their contracts, and there's a competitive advantage deal there, and I get that, but why if now NIL is legal, if these deals are legal, do you have to operate like you're under the table anymore? I think it would do A&M a lot better in these situations where they were able to, people are kind of making them the punching bag. If these collectives if this collective is working a little bit more out in the open, if you knew the name, if you knew who some of the people were behind it, and they were a little bit more in front of the camera talking about these things, because it takes away the conspiracy theory angle of being so cloak and dagger.
Yeah, I certainly hear you on that. I mean, yes, what we do know about Jimbo is, though, the man likes to work in the dark. He's the only one that talks as far as coaches go. He's not on social media. His media appearances, that's about as much as you're going to hear from him, right? So it shouldn't necessarily surprise us that that's the way they're operating. And if you're A&M, I see why they're doing that. The people who need to know what's going on, they know. And A&M probably, they just must feel like nobody else needs to know. And if they've got things going to where, it's legal and that's working well and they're getting these guys, then, I don't see them changing that. And to me, them letting a guy like Andy Staples come to this event and talking to them semi on the record, anonymously, background, kind of vague, is like, that was their way of saying like, hey, this is what we're doing. Like, we're doing it what we see as the right way. And I don't know if they're gonna, I'm not saying that's right, but I'm just saying that seems to be the way that they're gonna go about it.
Sure, but I think that's still a little too secret society-esque, the way that worked out with no names on the record or anything like that. I just, part of me wonders why you need to be so cloak and dagger if name, image, likeness, if everything is legal now. You can do it out in the open. Why not do it out in the open? So that is just my closing take on that. Anything that stuck out to you from the press conference? It was 9 minutes of vitriol and a lot of the same stuff.
Man, I mean, just very interesting. Like you said, Jimbo has just been so praising of Saban and just respectful of him more so over the years. And, Jimbo comes from one of the first families of football coaching, the Bowdens, right? Played for the Bowdens, coached under the Bowdens, very much connected to them. Made it very clear he learned a lot of things that he takes from them that he has implemented, and then alluded to there's other coaches that you don't take stuff from, alluding to that being Saban, a guy that he coached under for several years and won a championship with. Just very interesting how this respectful friendship and relationship just now seems broken. I'm just curious if it's going to stay like that forever or if there will be a mending time. They're also going to get to see each other here in a couple weeks.
I was about to say three important dates. You have the spring meetings coming up in Destin here soon. You have the SEC Media Days in late July, which you got to think this will be a whirlwind on those days. And then you have the October 8th game in Tuscaloosa between the two, which Jimbo Fisher said will be a lot of fun, won't it? Well, I think that's all the time we have on that subject. We had previously scheduled a nice big podcast to talk about the A&M baseball team and one Kendall Rogers to join us, but then all this happened, so we might get Kendall's take a little bit on this and then talk a little bit A&M baseball as well. So up next, Kendall Rogers from D1Baseball.com. Welcome back to the My Aggie Nation podcast. Of course, I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle over there, Alex Miller. But we have our special guest who was booked before Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher decided to have a title fight over the last 24 hours. To talk a little A&M baseball. It's Kendall Rogers from D1 Baseball. Kendall, how's it going?
It's going good. Hey, I'll be okay as long as you don't call me a cheat.
Yeah, there you go. Are you going to slap someone upside the head like your old man? That's really
exactly
what I want to know. So We'll start out with that little fun note. I know you tweeted out there that asking what's the college baseball equivalent to this kind of heated coaches rivalry. What'd you take from A, what Jimbo and Nick had to say on the college football side, and B, what do you think is the college baseball equivalent to that kind of rivalry now?
Well, this is like A&M beat writer Nirvana this week. You have Jim Schlossnagle last week being like brutally honest about the RPI and about canceling games. Now you got Jimbo Fisher calling somebody, basically a fraud and despicable. So a guy that was like his friend. So you're like living in Nirvana world right now. But, I think when you look at college baseball, I mean, the only comparison I can think of right now would be Tony Vitello and Dave Van Horney. Those two went at it last year in Knoxville. We were all disappointed that they weren't on each other's schedules. Maybe they'll play in Hoover, but that's probably the best equivalent. Mike Martin and Jim Morris back in the day was pretty heated. Those two did not like each other. It all kind of originated from, walkie-talkie gate, where if you remember, Miami got caught in Tallahassee signaling in the pitches with a walkie-talkie. and Mike Martin found out, and they had bad blood. But those two kind of patched up at the very end. So like Jimbo and Saban are kind of going the opposite direction. They're not patching up at the end. They're deciding to be mortal enemies at the end. So I kind of like it.
Yeah, it's done. It's done between those two. So we'll shift gears. We'll go into the stuff that you're here for, and that is A&M baseball team. You were here, I know, for the Arkansas series. Of course, keep a pulse on the A&M baseball team. What's your take on this squad? Because it's been a pretty interesting season in Jim Schlossnagle's first year at the helm.
It really has, and I think this is a team that if you look back at the Fordham series, that if you remember was a struggle. The Penn series, which they lost, was a struggle. If you would have told me the Frisco weekend was a disaster, and so if you could tell me back then that this team would be, top 6, top 7 in the country, I probably would have thought you were on something. And that's a testament to this team. They kind of stuck with the plan. They stayed bought in. And as the season's progressed, you've had guys like Austin Bowe step up. Ryan Targott has stepped up. Trevor Warner's finally healthy again. Remember, Travis, this was a team that 2 months ago, everybody kind of thought, once Trevor Warner went down, oh, well, the season's over. Now he's just kind of like one of the guys because of Dylan Rock and company. So I still think this is an A&M team that, is very offensive. I think this is an A&M team that, strangely enough, as we look ahead to the postseason, is still finding its footing from a pitching standpoint. But you're seeing signs of the pitching getting better. Will Johnson, I thought came into the game against Mississippi State and pitched pretty well in a big, in a kind of a high leverage situation. Chris Cortez in a high leverage situation actually had the changeup going for once. He's typically all fastball. And, they've had other guys, Robert Hogan and a few others. So they're going to need those guys to step up. But this is a team that offensively has certainly gotten much better as the season progressed. Pitching-wise, it's been a slow slog through the mud, but they're getting a little bit better each weekend. Yeah,
pitching is exactly kind of what I want to get into a little bit there on this A&M team because they can hit the cover off the ball, but that pitching has been a little bit inconsistent. And so, as A&M might look to the postseason and look to SEC tournament, even this series, they've only swept one series this year and had one series where there's been 3 good pitching performances. How important is finding a third, a fourth starter and having that consistency in the bullpen at this point in the season?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, how about just finding a second starter? I mean, this is a team that outside of Nathan Detmer has had issues. And I think it all boils down to they got to get Micah Dallas right. And, I'm a little concerned about him because I was watching a little bit of the game against Mississippi State when he came in. And, Schloss had a quick trigger with him. And I know why he did, because if you watch that, which I know you do at the games, you will kind of watch off to the side, the body language just was not good. He looked like a guy that was a little scared, a little timid, was not confident. And for them to, I think, reach kind of their goal at this point, which their goal at this point, frankly, is a top 16. Their goal, as strange as it sounds, is getting Omaha. This is a team that at this point, their expectation is Omaha. I get they've overachieved, but if you don't get to Omaha at this point, it's I would say a failure is not the right word, but it hasn't been the season that it could have been leading up to the postseason. So they just need him. They need him more than anybody to step up because he's a leader. He's a veteran. And he just needs to get his mind right, so to speak.
Yeah, Micah Dallas again in that one appearance came in for one batter, spiked 4 pitches right into the ground. He hasn't been doing his normal Pringles dancing, leading the crowd stuff. He's been a little bit off to the shadows.
Yeah, even though A&M's kind of had an up and down time with some of their pitchers, they've still been able to string together some impressive wins. Kendall, what's been maybe the most impressive series or game even that A&M's been able to take throughout this run over the last 6 weeks or so?
I go back to, most people would say the Arkansas series, but I kind of go back to early on in conference and LSU series. I think that's kind of the weekend that I felt like A&M started thinking, you know what, we've got a chance to be pretty good. I was actually just talking to Jay Johnson the other day, the head coach at LSU, and he was kind of telling me, he's like, outside of all the teams we played, I actually think A&M's the most impressive team we played. And that actually kind of surprised me because, I wouldn't have said that. And so to hear him say that kind of struck a chord with me. But if you look back at that weekend, they got big pitches when they needed it. If I remember right, Moon Menifee came in and actually had a really big relief outing against them. And they obviously knocked the cover off the ball that weekend. So I would say out of all the weekends, the LSU series on the road is the weekend that you're kind of like, whoa, this team has a chance to be pretty good. And let's not forget, they should have swept that series. Like they have tons of opportunities late in that final game to sweep that series. So for me, it's that weekend.
Yeah, and neither me or Travis probably would have expected A&M would be playing for the SEC West crown. I don't know if you would have at that point, but
no.
Considering that they're in this position now, what would it mean for the A&M baseball program to get the SEC West crown, something they haven't done before, and also just in Schlossnagle's first season here?
It is kind of crazy to think about that. I mean, they didn't win the SEC crown the year that they got to the Super and were a top 8 national seed.
No, they not the West. I believe that the highest they've gotten is second,
okay.
if I'm not mistaken.
They won the tournament in 16.
Yeah, they won the tournament. They must have finished behind like Arkansas or somebody. But yeah, that's crazy. I thought they won the West that year. But I mean, to win the West with this team, whenever that team couldn't do it, would be ultra impressive. The thing about it was kind of funny is, like, on one hand, if you're Jim Schlossnagle, like you love this group and you love the fact they're setting the foundation. But on the other, you're going into year 2 and year 3 with like, hey, we just won the SEC West. Like, that is the expectation. So you're kind of setting a really high bar for what your tenure needs to be. But I mean, I think they embrace it. I mean, if you look at their coaching staff, Nate Yeskie won a national championship at Oregon State. Nolan Cade won a national championship at LSU as a reliever, and Mike Early, developed Gage Wortman, Spencer Torkelson, all those guys at Arizona State. So I think those guys embrace the expectations. But this is an A&M program that has gone from what I would consider before the transfer portal to be a massive rebuilding job to an A&M program that now people expect you to be in the hunt in the SEC West, and there's no reason why, with A&M's resources, why they should not be in the hunt for number 1 in the SEC West every year. I'm not saying they should win it, and I'm not saying they should get to Omaha every year. That's absolutely ridiculous. But they should definitely be in the discussion.
Yeah, it's the first time A&M has been atop the SEC West ranking since 2018 when they went to that final game. Arkansas beat Ole Miss,
right?
And then Mississippi State beat A&M to give Arkansas the crown. So it was it's been a little bit since A&M has kind of been in this position. So I want to take a little bit of an aside and talk a little bit about what we opened the program with a little, and that is Jim Schlossnagle's comments last week, where he kind of said the quiet part out loud, saying that they were going to cancel that Incarnate Word game. It was mutually canceled, but they were doing it because it hurt their RPI no matter what happened in that game. And then we've seen this rash and this widespread cancellation since that's happened. What is your take on that? How does that affect baseball? I know you tweeted on your podcast, you were saying that this is something that's probably going to be looked at by the committee moving forward. But what has RPI done to baseball right now, and what's the fix?
The thing that's really interesting is, and I'm trying to think back to a year where I've looked at the RPI and noticed that a team this late in the season is dropping 7 spots from losing 1 game. And if you look back at the South Carolina series, and I think Jim a little bit pressed the panic button after that weekend because they lost that 1 game to South Carolina. They dropped like 8 spots in the RPI. And honestly, frankly, I've never seen that before. Like, I've never seen so many teams around the country. I was looking, I'd have to go back and look, but there were teams last weekend. They were up 8 spots, down 9 spots, up 10, down 11. Like this late in the year, and like that just shouldn't happen. I don't ever notice it happening in the past, and so I think it's a product of the RPI. The thing I look at when it comes to the Jim and Mike Bianco at Ole Miss canceling a game against Arkansas State, Virginia canceling Mount St. Mary's or something. My take on it is kind of like don't hate the player, hate the game, and the reason why they're doing this is because of the system. And I do expect the committee to deal with it. I don't expect the committee to look at like A&M or Virginia or Ole Miss and go, you know what? We're going to keep Ole Miss out of the tournament. We're going to keep A&M out of the top 8 because they canceled a single game against UIW. I don't think it's going to happen. But I think what the committee is going to do is say, hey, we need to put in safeguards that protects these teams that they were supposed to play. And so my expectation is going into next year, and I know the committee is going to discuss it. I've already been told that. But my hunch is they're going to put in a system to where you can drop, let's say, your top 3 or 4 worst RPI games from your resume. So this becomes a totally moot issue. And it solves 2 different things. I kind of like this. So you don't have the RPI game count against you if you're A&M. And guess what it does? If it's your worst RPI game, guess what it does? It allows Jim to actually go pitch some guys who otherwise would never pitch And because it's like you just throw away the game. So it actually allows you to use some kids that otherwise you would never use. And it also gives an opportunity for the UIWs, the Tarletons of the world to actually play A&M or Texas. Because what you don't want the committee to hold it against a team like A&M or Ole Miss. Because what's going to happen is if you're Jim Schlossnagle, I mean, and Tarleton wants to play you next year or UIW wants to play you, you're telling Ryan Schatzberger, like, I'm not playing you. Mm-hmm. Like, why would I play you? I'll go play St. Houston and Huntsville or something. So you also don't want that if you're the NCAA.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about guys as former catcher, you get your catchers off his knees for another game or two or something like that, can throw another guy in, develop some catchers. So that
we put guys like Travis Brown in there to play a game.
That will not happen. Never.
Yeah, well, Kendall, looking at this weekend, what A&M's got against Ole Miss, Ole Miss certainly a team that's kind of surging. What are you kind of seeing from the Rebels right now?
I'll tell you what, I think it's going to be a great series. I actually ended up picking A&M. I kind of went back and forth. I just think A&M is one of those teams that's been ultra consistent. I think Ole Miss is one of those teams who, until the last 2 weeks, has been inconsistent. And there's no doubt they played really well against Missouri. They played really well against LSU. But I just have a weird feeling that LSU is just not in a very good spot right now. I think they caught LSU in the right weekend. But when you look at Ole Miss overall, the big key for them offensively, they're getting bigger hits in bigger clutch situations. Kevin Graham, who's hurt for much of the year, is back in that lineup. He gives them a veteran presence, a lot of at-bats throughout his career. He's got a powerful presence in the lineup. And I think you look at the pitching staff as a totally different unit too. Early in the year, John Gaddis, who's now a bullpen piece, was in the Friday role. They had, Derek Diamond in the Saturday role. They've kind of shifted things a little bit. Dylan DeLucia's moved from the bullpen to the Friday role, been really good for them. And then Hunter Elliott in the number 2 spot has been pretty good with then Brandon Johnson on the back end. So they've solved some of their pitching issues. It's like A&M. They're still not like surefire pitching wise, but they're better than they were 2 months ago. And then offensively, getting Kevin Graham back has been huge for them.
So here's the question that I think all Aggies want to know. Has A&M done enough to host, and what's it going to take for A&M to be a national seed?
Kendall, keep me in my own bed. Let's go.
Do what?
I said, keep me in my own bed. Let's go.
There we go. Well, speaking of Jimbo and Saban, maybe we can get Schloss versus Sarley's down in College Station.
There you go.
Sorry, Schloss. So I just think when you look at A&M right now, so for hosting, I would say if they can win one this weekend and not just totally – the bed in Hoover, I think they're a lock to host. I think if they lose a series this weekend, I think they probably need to win a couple of games in Hoover to be a top 8. But if they win that series this weekend, I mean, you're at 19-11 in the SEC. Your RPI is probably 14 or 15 after a road series win over a 30 RPI team. At that point, I feel very confident about their top 8 chances because at that point, you're probably the SEC West champ by tiebreaker with Arkansas.
Yeah, and you kind of look at RPI where they are. I mean, yeah, they might right now they're 19, but you got teams like Texas, Vanderbilt, not Arkansas anymore, I don't believe.
It's Georgia.
But, Arkansas is behind them in the pecking order. Texas has a TCU, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State problem. The problem they have right now is they're behind those teams in the conference standings, and they have a tough pathway to get ahead of them.
Yeah. So a lot of head-to-head wins in RPI ahead of them. So it's like you said, it's a weird RPI year. But when you go into Hoover, when you go into the postseason, I know both when I talked to Jim Schlossnagle, when I talked to Michael Early, the exact quote they gave me is, teams don't swing their way to Omaha, but right now it seems like A&M is swinging their way through the SEC. Is this a team that could potentially swing their way to what's the ceiling on where they are if they're being carried by their offense?
Yeah, so if I'm being just dead honest with you, like I do think they're vulnerable in a regional. I think they're less vulnerable in a super because in a super, if you're Jim and you get in a bind with the Saturday starter in a super, well, you can just throw the kitchen sink at them because guess what? If you don't win the next day on Sunday, you're going home anyway. So you're just throwing the kitchen sink at them again. Where that doesn't, where that approach doesn't work is in a regional. You can't just throw the kitchen sink at every game because then you run out of pitching. And so I think A&M is vulnerable in the regional. It all depends on who they get there. But again, I look at this team overall and they've continued to hit. The other thing that I think they have gotten better at is defensively. Obviously they still make some mistakes, but a couple of months ago. I mean, this was a rough defensive club, and I feel like they're at least making big defensive plays. At this point in the season. So, I mean, I would like to say that I think they would struggle in the regional, but man, they've won 6-7 straight SEC series, so it's kind of hard to doubt them at this point.
Yeah, well, and defense is a very good point, because you also look at how many teams would you say would you put in this situation who, heading into that LSU series, had 3 of their starting infielders out with Trevor Warner, Ryan Targok, and Clyde Harrison, who still hasn't come back, and Cole Kaler has been able to slot in pretty nicely there.
There's no doubt. I mean, all those guys have done a nice job, and I'll tell you what is kind of the underrated aspect of this team is kind of their toughness. I kind of look back at, the play that Jacob Polish had against South Carolina, where he kind of had that brainless moment where he kind of threw the ball to home, but like airmailed it. I think South Carolina took the lead on that.
Yeah, so that's when they retook the lead. And that was the one where the ball, he took it off the end of the bat and it rolled about 5 feet foul and somehow, I've never seen that before.
Exactly. And so, he makes that massive error. Everybody's, he's on the ground like, oh, man, really? Then what happens? Then Brett Minnick goes up there and hits that home run. So that's just kind of how this team is. And when you have that kind of culture, man, you know as well as anybody being on a good team, that matters. That matters a lot.
Yeah, we're good to go. Kendall, thanks so much for giving us a few minutes of your time and that 5-tool backdrop that you have there of TD Ameritrade, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. Well, Kendall, before we go, tell everyone where they can reach you and get to your stuff.
Yeah, you can go to just at Kendall Rogers on Twitter and at D1 Baseball on Twitter as well. I will not call anyone despicable, I promise.
And will not slap anyone upside the head. So, again, thanks so much for Kendall Rogers. Thanks so much for y'all for joining us for another episode of the My Aggie Nation podcast. For Alex Miller, I'm Travis Brown, and we'll see you next week.
It seems like every day, everything just has a way to burst at the seams. But if we don't watch what we're doing, our hearts will get ruined by silly things. Good love ain't easy, girl, we know that's true. And if we wanna keep it, we gotta watch everything that we do, yeah. Don't wanna make sure, my baby, make sure you're sticking with me. Don't wanna make sure that we'll be all that we can be, all that we can be. All that we can